All right, in this video, I'm going to be discussing these three artworks. So if you have them on separate note pages, that's fine. If you have them all together, if you want to write them on one page, you can. Artwork number 193, 209, and 194. And I put these together because they're all commenting on different burial customs or different ways that people have been buried in this unit, or what they've been buried with, I guess. So the first one we're going to talk about is the oldest, and this is the terracotta warriors from the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor of China. So the first dynasty is the Qin dynasty, spelled with a Q, because the first emperor, Qin, united China. And these are painted terracotta, even though we can't see much of the paint anymore, 221 to 209 BCE, before Common Era. So the second dynasty is then the Han dynasty, and that's when the funeral banner of Lady Di was created. This is also in China, 180 BCE, and this is painted silk. And then much later is the Taj Mahal. This is from the 17th century, and this is in India. So this is stone masonry, so stonework with marble, with inlay of stones and gardens. I don't know if I gave you a picture, of the gardens. Well, I guess the waterway here is part of the gardens. All right, here's our terracotta warriors. And a lot of us remember this maybe from middle school, or you've heard about it before. So that's great that we're going to be familiar with it. So some specific visual evidence. There's about 8,000 terracotta. Terracotta just means the type of clay. And they're called warriors because they're all standing like they're in an army. They have weapons. There's so many of them, and they look like soldiers. There's about 100 wooden chariots, 2 bronze chariots, about 30,000 weapons. And this is all buried as part of the tomb of the first emperor of China. This was his tomb. All right, so historians have come up with some possible functions. Why would one do this? Why would someone spend the majority of their life working on what's going to be with them in the afterlife? It's a possible function. This could be representation of a Chinese army marching into the next world. This could be an elaborate mausoleum created to accompany the first emperor of China into the afterlife. And that word mausoleum, that's exactly what the Taj Mahal is. So we need to know a mausoleum is a built burial chamber, or a structure, a place. A possible function is to protect the ruler, because he was really strict. He made a lot of enemies. So maybe this was his army to protect him in the afterlife. Okay, so what do you notice when you look at them? Are they all the same, or are they all different? What do you think? So they're all individuals. What did I say? 3,000 of these guys? How many? I already forgot. 8,000. There's about 8,000 of them, and they're all individual people. They are not carbon copies. A lot of labor went into this. If we learned anything from Stonehenge, if a lot of labor went into something, it's meaningful. It means something. It's for a purpose. So there's different features, facial hair, different types to suggest soldiers from far reaches of the realm. So this reflects the Chinese religion and philosophy that's about individuality of each soldier despite their large numbers. So Taoism emphasized individualism and non-conformity. Here's some different looks that they're giving us, but even though they're all individual, the artists still used molds for creating. So maybe they had a face mold, but then they would combine that face mold with a different ear mold or a different hair mold. So they would use molds in order to create these mass people, but then combine them with different parts to still create individual people. All right, they were of course all at once painted. Here's another view of them. Oh, I love this shot. So I love that even though there's all these, whoa, buddy.
Early release supervisor.
All right, so this moment of detail. So even though there's all these thousands of soldiers, they still had this detail that was an attention given to how they were being created. And this reminded me of the Lapita pottery, right? It looks like a tool was used to stamp or incise into the clay to get that organized pattern.
Different kinds of face and body structures who came from different regions of China. By the way, recent digs have revealed that in addition to clay soldiers, Shiwandi's underground realm included terracotta officials and even troops of acrobats, slightly smaller than the soldiers, but created with the same methods you see one here. He also had a lot of company in his tomb. Any concubine who had not borne him a son had the dubious honor of being strangled and buried with the emperor.
That's nice.
And the workmen who built the tomb were also closed in as soon as it was completed and left to die. Altogether, a charming fellow.
I just thought that was interesting. All right, so the mausoleum also had a river of mercury that paralleled the eternal rivers and the spiritual realm. Could have possibly been what killed him as well, now that we know how toxic mercury is. But, you know, you live, you learn. The emperor was obsessed with the idea of immortality. So the site of this archaeological site of his mausoleum shows his influence over his subjects, his reign of power. There again, the amount of labor that went into this. All right, so what connections can we make from the terracotta warriors to the contemporary art piece called Sunflower Seeds by Ai Weiwei, who is from China? Obviously, the color palette's really similar, although these were originally painted. But that Chinese philosophy of having your individuality, even though you're in these large numbers, can still relate to the porcelain sunflower seeds. These are all individually hand painted by artists. So even though they all look the same, there's still little differences if you look at them. The material, so we have porcelain and then we have terracotta, which is a clay. Also the setting that they're in, this looks like some sort of like an airport hangar, and then the turbine hall looks very airport hangar-esque. All right, the next piece is the second dynasty, the Han Dynasty. So some context of what's happening at the time. So the Qin Dynasty from 221 to 206 BCE is considered China's first dynasty. Qin's ruler was the first to declare himself an emperor. He had the Great Wall built, and then obviously the terracotta warriors, his mausoleum. And then the second dynasty was the Han Dynasty. So the big deal thing that came out of the Han Dynasty was the Silk Road. That is when this was opened, when it started. This was a land route that linked China by trade all the way to Rome. So now we're going to start seeing and talking about cultural exchange, right? And not just artisan goods, but ideas and religions are going to be traded and moved throughout Asia. This is kind of a map of how it started in India, Buddhism, and then everywhere that it went to, like Afghanistan. So why was it called the Silk Road or the Silk Route? And it's because China was the first country in the world to breed silkworms and produce silk fabric. So that silk was the major export going out to Europe. Like I said, not only trade, but also Buddhism. So relating that to the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan, those are really the main Buddhas that's in that area because of Buddhism traveling up through the Silk Route. So the Bamiyan Valley is a 30-mile long valley that once had a major trade route running through it. So when you can see the Bamiyan Buddhas, they're not in this picture, but they have a lot of Greek references or influence because of the drapery of the robes. All right, man, back to Lady Di. So this is the archaeological discovery of the tomb, and here is her in a tomb, and it reminds me of King Tut, right, where it has all these different casings to the sarcophagus, and then all the stuff that was found buried around her. So the piece that we're focusing on, the fabric, you can see it here on top. So that was actually covering her or draped around her. So the banner of Lady Di comes from one of the best preserved tombs in China, containing the remains of the Marquis of Di and his family. So very noble people in their family. The tomb also included a bunch of stuff. Function. So the banner was made for Lady Di. Banners like this one were displayed during funeral procession and ceremony, and was also covering her body when she was found. We're going to skip the listing of this one. Anything about the afterlife is really easy to relate back to Egyptian artworks, right? Especially being separated into registers. So the way this piece is divided, here's what it looks like on the left, and this is kind of an illustration in the middle. But on the top is more of the heavenly realm, and it's very organized, a lot you can relate that to Christian artworks of heaven and hell. Heaven is very organized and hell is kind of chaotic. Here you have Lady Di and her attendants, and then you have the body of Lady Di with mourners, and then you have the underworld down here, and you can see some demons. That's going to be the underworld. Looks like they're playing drums down here. That's not what they're doing. Maybe a banquet. All right, so this summarizes the worldview between human and supernatural worlds. Represents following the rules to maintain order. We're going to go ahead and listen to her.
So let's start with the upper or heavenly realm. On the left side, or the yin or female side, we see a toad above and a rabbit next to a crescent moon. According to legend, a woman named Chang Yi selfishly gulped down an elixir of immortality that her husband had won from the Queen of the West, taking it all for herself. She did gain immortality, but she began to float up toward the moon and was transformed into a toad.
Whoops.
Next to the moon, we see the rabbit pounding herbs into a mortar to make that elixir of immortality. On the right side, remember that's the yang or masculine side, we see a sun with a raven. According to legend, 10 suns lived in a tree. Each morning, one of the suns took a turn shining on the sky, leaving the others resting in the tree. One day, bored with their orderly life, they all rushed up into the sky at once, ran around wildly. The legendary archer Hu Yi became so angry at this that he, at the sign of the dead and dying burned people on the earth, that he shot 9 of the 10 suns. He had to be reminded to leave one sun in the sky. The central figure is probably Nuwa, a goddess who had the body of a snake and could change shape 70 times a day. She modeled the first people from mud and taught them how to have children. On either side of her are cranes, which are symbols of longevity. Below them are heavenly dragons. The dragons shown here are those that draw the moon and the sun across the sky, sort of like Apollo and his chariot. Experts argue over these interpretations, and I don't know enough to take sides. But let me ask more generally, what do these images suggest about Chinese beliefs? It seems pretty clear that this design reflects at least some belief in an ordered heavenly realm, a natural division between female and male roles, a strong preference for everybody following the rules to maintain order.
All right, visual evidence. This is a T-shaped silk banner. The space is divided in registers. The scenes represent 3 levels of the universe: heaven, earth, and then the underworld. And then here's another view. You remember this guy on the right, the Jade Song. This is from the prehistoric unit. And historians believe there was a funerary purpose behind the Jade Song because they were found buried along with these circular discs, which are bees. So back on Lady Di, so where the horizontal section, the heaven, meets the vertical stem is a gate guarded by 2 seated figures right there. Then below, you have 2 intertwined dragons loop through a circular jade piece known as a bee. Right there, assuming that's what it is. The bee is usually a symbol of heaven. So then everything above that is heavenly, and then everything below this depicts the underworld. So it's pieces like this that have helped historians make these hypotheses or assumptions about these earlier artworks that there's no documentation on. Here's a depiction of her, Lady Di, with her servants. So what could this piece have in common with Hugh Nefer's Book of the Dead? So they're both depicting, they both have registers, they're both depicting a journey through the underworld, but they also have self-portraits. So Lady Di, I don't think is continuous. I think, no, it might be continuous because she might be again in the underworld below. Hugh Nefer is definitely a continuous narrative because he is repeated throughout. Okay, the search for immortality was an important theme in both of these dynasties, as was the Chinese religion of Taoism. All right, we're going to India, Taj Mahal. So what does this look like? What would you assume the function of this building was just by looking at it? Most of us would assume it's a mosque because it has minarets, and a minaret was a feature of a mosque to call its people to prayer. So the ruler of the Mughal dynasty built this as a mausoleum. This is not a mosque. And this was built for his favorite wife who died during childbirth. I believe it was their 14th child. But that is the function. That's why this was built. His crypt was added later after his death. I'm going to say about 30 years later. So this is a mausoleum for the rulers of India at the time of the Mughal dynasty. This represents the queen's house in paradise. So I'm just going to read this to you. So when she died, the emperor is reported to have refused to engage in festivities, postponed his kids' weddings, and allegedly made frequent visits to his wife's temporary resting place. Like, he loved her. Therefore, stories like these have led to the Taj Mahal being referred to as an architectural symbol of love in popular literature. I think that's beautiful. All right, so there's also a mix of cultures that we're seeing here, kind of a mix of Hindu and Muslim. So the dominating religion is going to be Hinduism at this time in India, but this is reflecting the Muslim rulers, the Muslim dynasty. So what parts are reflecting what, right? The minarets are totally decorative or ornamental. They just provide symmetry and balance and harmony. They are not used to call people to prayer. The Iwans are influenced from the Great Mosque of Isfahan. Those are those open archways. Then you have a central plan mausoleum, and this is influenced by the central plan Mosque of Nope, we just did the Mosque of Isfahan. This one's in Turkey. Mosque of Selim II. Sorry, I had to look it up. This is inspired, and Mosque of Selim II is inspired by Hagia Sophia. So this is the dome, a central dome over a central plan. And then, of course, there's arches, there's domes, and there's a plinth. And plinth is inspired by our Hindu temples like Lakshmana. So this is what it's raised up on, a plinth. All right, so how does this represent paradise? How did the function, being the house represents paradise, influence the form? So the plinth, this is elevated on a platform. It's surrounded by these reflecting waterways, which we haven't looked at yet. All of this creates an illusion that the mausoleum is kind of floating like clouds. It is the throne of God perched above these gardens of paradise. We just said that. So also the use of white marble. This is very pure. It's connected to divine principles like saints. So it gives those entombed in there this elevated holy status. Here's our central plan. The design invokes the idea of 8 paradises that is mentioned in the Quran, because there's these different chapels or chambers that go around the central octagon. Also, what other architecture is octagon, right? We have the Dome of the Rock, Santa Sabina. Man, I gotta go back to my notes. Here's another view of a plan. And then you have the crypt down below. By the way, if you go back and you look at the crypt, right, she's gonna be centered because that's who it was built for. And then he kind of has that asymmetrical crypt off to the left, or tomb. All right, here's an aerial view of the Taj Mahal. And then you can see the waterways. This is what is in the gardens. And then you can see kind of an entrance gate. And that's what we're looking at here on the right. So that is the use of red sandstone, which is contrasting with that white marble. Oh, I love this detail view of the Iwan. And again, you can see Quranic passages all on the outside, and then the floral arabesque imagery. All right, so marble was used to contrast with that red sandstone, and again, creates a sense of the structures floating among the clouds. Here's a look inside at the crypt. I believe this is the crypt. So how is this typical of Islamic architecture? How can this still represent paradise? So you have Quranic passages, you know, it's written in that Kufic, beautiful Arabic writing. This is actually carved marble, where you can see the light coming through. There's floral imagery. So Quranic script decorates the building. Dominant floral theme is associated with paradise. And again, the designs are very intricate. It's complicated, it's harmonious, it's symmetrical. And then here's a picture of the outside, and then relating that to Dome of the Rock. Really similar. All right, the grounds represent a vast funerary garden. The gardens found in heaven in the Islamic tradition. And again, this is something written about in the Quran, or the gardens found in heaven. And you can really see the white cloud-like manner this is portrayed in compared to the red sandstone around it. All right, the Court of the Lions at Alhambra Palace in Spain is an Islamic artwork, and it is secular, and we know that because there's lions here. So here is a picture from the ground plan where it comes from, right? And it's divided by 4 with these waterways. So I'm going to read from the College Board. They said the garden in the Court of the Lions at the Alhambra is divided into quadrants by channels of water in a fashion similar to that of the garden situated in front of the Taj Mahal. Islamic layouts are based on the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. The 4 channels of water represent 4 rivers of paradise flowing outward from the center. And then relating that to other gardens from our 250. So you have the Palace of Versailles on the top. You have Royanji, which is a Zen Buddhist rock garden in Japan on the bottom right. And then you have, is it Kusama? We haven't gotten there yet, but we will. We're going to get there. And this is called Narcissus Garden from, I want to say the 70s. I think that's it. Boom.